There it goes.
Welcome everyone to the Harding Presidential Sites and to this year's version of our Fireside Chat. We always kind of celebrate the end of winter as we slide into spring. We'll pretend that that's going to happen. This year's topic is about President Harding's Best Minds Cabinet. Jon Anderson, longtime Harding researcher, is going to talk about how Harding selected his cabinet members, what his thinking was, and what they accomplished in the Harding administration. So I'm going to turn it over to Jon.
Good evening, everybody. As Sherry said, we're going to go through the cabinet selection process for Warren Harding, which seems kind of poignant, especially with all the news that we've seen over the previous months with the current administration's cabinet selection. And we'll see a very different process. Some of it's because 1920 versus 2025 with access to information, or a little bit more of keeping thoughts closer to the chest than publicly announcing it, so things like that. Now, just for giggles, if you look at the picture that's up there, you'll see if anyone can figure this out, other than a couple people in the room that have already spoken to me about it at work here. Bonus points if you can tell me what's wrong with this photo.
He was not left.
Bingo, he's not a lefty. That is a mirrored image. I love the picture though. I think it's a great photo, but Warren's not a lefty. But for one day, we'll pretend that he is. So it's November 2nd, 1920. Warren just turned 55. He was elected president of the United States in an overwhelming fashion over Jim Cox. And now the real work and the real fun starts of trying to piece together an administration. Like President Trump over the time before his inauguration, Harding had the next 4 months to prepare to enter the White House. It was time for him to get his own house in order before entering the White House. But just like the campaign trail, when the entire world's eyes were placed on Marion, once again, everyone's going to be watching very closely to action in Marion, Ohio, to see what's going to be happening instead in the White House in Washington, D.C. Like all facts in the Harding story, there is always tons of misconceptions, ill-researched facts, people trying to plug holes where a little extra time may have found a better solution, depending on who's writing the stories. And these come from, the cabinet selection's no different. And we have two books in particular that are very big reasons for this, and that includes Francis Russell's The Shadow of Blooming Grove, which has given us all sorts of fun stories that here at this site we spend multiple times trying to disprove or explain why the research of Francis Russell was incomplete. And then we also have The Harding Tragedy that was co-written by Harry Daugherty, the Attorney General and campaign manager for Warren Harding. Misconceptions come out that Warren's cabinet selections are mindless choices, that there were corrupt bargains going on in the background, that there was heavy influence going on. There's always this belief that Warren's incapable of making his own decisions or a policy, that he's just being pulled like a puppet by party bosses. And the more you dig into this, the more you realize this is just not the case. And then you have Harry Daugherty, who has this, as one of the only people that's a member of the Harry Daugherty fan club. I love him dearly, but there's something wrong with him too. The problem is he has this codependency with Warren to try to ride the coattails of Warren's successes, and he has this issue of always, after the fact, changing the story a little bit. That whatever Warren did, well, Warren did it, but I was the one that was really involved there. He would. The story always is that, from Daugherty's standpoint, Warren didn't want to run for president, but Daugherty always says that he found Warren like a turtle sunning himself on a log, and I had to push him into the water. And that's always his mindsets. And you can see that if you ever get a chance, read The Harding Tragedy just for the giggles sake of it, that you can see how Daugherty changes the story to making him the central character. And in these cases discussed in the cabinet, it's no different. Following 12 days of R&R and traveling through New Orleans, Texas, and Panama, Warren returns to Marion, and he changes the front porch campaign now into the Great Listening Post. This is a place that his home will now be a place for invitations to invite people to come in and talk about political policy, appointments, anything poignant to try to figure out how to run his administration properly. This is the newspaper man in Warren. I'm going to get sources of information from everybody I can and come up with the best decisions. Will Hayes, who's the Republican National Committee chairman and a major role player in the Harding campaign, is going to be in charge of doling out the invitations and making sure that they're evenly split. Warren was very specific that these invitations aren't meant to be sent to a specific crowd. So these are going to be people that are high-ranking senators, congressmen, people within the party itself to kind of get a sense of policy and feel for the nation. He's also inviting leading Democrats to come and speak to him. The goal is, as you kind of, we'll kind of go through, Warren's reshaping what the presidential cabinet had been for the last couple administrations. And in doing so, he is trying to create a form of consensus. Not everyone's going to be happy, but not everyone's going to be mad. Everyone can respect the decisions that are made and understand that the people that are involved can make the right decisions to help lead the nation where it needs to go. But Warren, being savvy, also has Harry New, who's a former chair of the Republican National Committee, a former senator from Indiana, and he was also a member of the territorial committees that Warren sat on in the Senate. Harry New is going to be in Washington, D.C., acting as kind of a go-between. He's going to go around as people are coming in, as policies are coming. Warren can float those ideas out to Harry New and say, hey, just circle around with the people in Congress, see what their thoughts are, to kind of get a feel of, is this something that makes sense? How does everyone feel about these decisions? And kind of also get a feel of how he should be approaching it. If it's somebody that he really thinks should be there, how can he present it in the light that people can understand his mindset and thoughts as well? Warren had candidates in mind for his cabinet, but he wanted to gain further information to make sure, kind of more as a sense to reaffirm those decisions. And Warren's not dumb. That's the one thing that's good about him. He knows he doesn't have all the information, but he knows how to find the information to make the right decisions. And that's where this Great Listening Post comes into play. Someone like Wilson that will sit there and say, I know the 5 people I want in here right now. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I know what I want. Warren sits there and says, I have an idea, but let's talk and see. I want point, I want counterpoint. I want to make the best decision. Warren comes in with some goals for what to select in a cabinet. And again, he's reshaping what he's shooting for. So Secretary of State, one of the most prominent positions in the cabinet, he wants a respected and able person to work with Congress as a whole. Someone that's not going to be butting heads, someone that can work in consensus with Congress. Secretary of Agriculture, a real farmer, not a lobbyist. Secretary of Labor, identified with labor, but not a radical. We'll talk about the labor issues a little bit. Secretary of Treasury, he wants a Midwesterner. He does not want a New York or New England banker. And he wants 1 to 2 men upon whom he can rely for personal advice and whose loyalty he could absolutely trust. He is trying again to break that mold. Administrations had, the banking institutions, for example, have always been viewed as the dominant force of all financial institutions in the United States. Warren is trying to say we need to pull that back. The agriculture, which is a major issue. We are in a country that is trying to rebuild post-World War I, trying to move ourselves from a war economy to a standard economy. There's a lot of moving parts, and he wants the people to have a feeling that they have a say in making that country return to that normalcy agenda that he has. So these are goals that the previous administrations did not necessarily follow. I do love the political cartoon. I've discovered over the last 4 years, I've becoming more and more obsessed with the 1920s political cartoons. But if you look at it, it's a GOP toy shop for cabinet portfolios. And Warren's in there talking to an elephant. And outside looking in to see who's going to be in there, you have the likes of Frank Loudon, Herbert Hoover, William Howard Taft's the big boy there in the middle, and John Weeks, Leonard Wood, but they're all looking in, hoping to see if maybe they might have a chance to see what Warren's got in the toy shop. So first, let's take a look at what's going on with the Secretary of State. I'm going to, for the sake of everybody, because I sat there going through the cabinet and I had to remind myself exactly what are all these roles. You always hear the different secretary roles, and sometimes it's nice to kind of have a quick cut and dry, what the heck are they supposed to do and why does it matter? So Secretary of State is the principal advisor of all foreign related affairs and is one of the most, if not the most important cabinet position out there. As we're going through these selections, we're going to see kind of a tussle going on within the Republican Party. In 1912, you have Teddy Roosevelt splitting with the progressives, and following in 1916, the progressives and the Republicans came back together, but there's still a division on how the Republican Party should be handling its policies. So you're going to find at this time this push back and forth of a progressive nomination, a more conservative nomination, and then sometimes a middle road, which is more where Warren's headed. So it's kind of interesting to see where they go with that. You also have this ongoing fight about the League of Nations following World War I, the initial concept of an international body to regulate relations to hopefully prevent a second world war, which obviously the League of Nations did not pan out well. The United States was torn. Woodrow Wilson really wanted the League. A lot of other people said we don't want the League because of including Congress, because of the connotations of the United States being pulled into a foreign war that we might not be involved in. So you will always have this back and forth of pro-League, anti-League, progressive, conservative, and then you have Warren Harding right down the middle. And this is why he's doing this great listening post. He's bringing in the progressives, he's bringing in the pro-League, anti-League, what's everyone's thoughts, and let's find the person that can understand every issue that's on the table. So the Secretary of State being as big as it is, a big of a position as it is, we have issues of what's Warren going to pick. This is the first Republican administration in 8 years. So are we going to return to the past of when Taft was in office? Are we going to make a movement towards progressiveness? We're not sure. So for example, the anti-League of Nations group was pushing for Philander Knox of Pennsylvania. He's there on the left. He worked as the Attorney General for William McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt. He was also William Howard Taft's Secretary of State. So he's coming in with a repertoire of past Republican successes. And these are some people that do have the thought, well, Warren doesn't know what he's doing. Bring in the guy that did it before. He was great at it. And even better, when Knox was in office, he was focusing on international relations with the term of dollar diplomacy, which is kind of a fun one. Knox was pushing for, instead of showing military strength internationally, we would just dangle money and support to get them to do what we might want to have happen instead. That's dollar diplomacy. So that sounds like a great idea. Let's go that way. We don't have to fight. We can just use our monetary might. That could work. Then on the other side, you have people wanting, the conservative Republicans wanting Elihu Root, who's on the right. He's a former New York senator, and he was William McKinley's Secretary of War and Teddy Roosevelt's Secretary of State. So again, we see Teddy Roosevelt and the progressives show their heads again. So there's this thought that this could promote the Roosevelt progressive wing of bringing in Elihu Root for it. And the thought that Root championed different international policies. So both seemed like they were great ideas. There was also this question pushing again of this irreconcilable belief. Irreconcilables are referring to senators that were against the League of Nations. Warren was a member of the Irreconcilables in Congress. People were wondering, is he going to follow that mold into office? So these are all the little things that are chirping in the background of Warren trying to figure out what to do. The press is following every person that's coming in and out of these meetings every single day in Marion. and they are hearing little buzz that, well, I'm hearing Knox might really have a chance at this. Elihu Root comes and visits Marion, and when he goes in, everyone's like, oh, he's here. He's going to be the man. Why would he be invited if he wasn't the man? And Root leaves, but he has no offer. The thing that's fun about this is as we kind of watch the progression, Warren does have a plan, and he's keeping it very close to his chest. And it's kind of fun to watch the little pieces move. Warren always knew who he wanted, and it was always Charles Evans Hughes. He's the former governor of New York, former associate justice of the Supreme Court, and the 1916 Republican candidate for president. In the future, he's going to be the Supreme Court Chief Justice that's fighting against FDR during the New Deal era. Hughes was one of the very first person to come to Marion to meet with Warren. On December 10th, 1920, so just a few days after Warren returned to Marion and started this whole thing, he invited Charles Hughes to come and speak with him. And he offered him the position of the Secretary of State right then and there. He knew Hughes brought something different to this position. He was someone that was popular amongst the Republicans still. There was people in 1920 that were a branch that was really pushing for him to be the standard bearer for the Republican Party again, as opposed to any other candidate. He was known for fighting for fairer labor laws and regulations while he was in governor of New York. He was a compromiser regarding the League of Nations. He was someone that came in initially pro-League, but realized there was some issues. He personally tried to pull in members of the Senate, Wilson, all these people that he knew through his political connections to sit down at a table to discuss what can we do about this. It didn't come to fruition, but he was the one trying to do it using his influence. He understood the gravity of all these issues. This was the man that was calm, balanced, and a great sounding board to Warren in a position like this. He knew that this was the right person. Warren offers the position on December 10th. Charles Evans Hughes returns to New York briefly because at this point he is practicing law privately and he feels like he needs to make sure that that's okay with his law partners. So on December 13th, he sends a letter back to Warren that says that he was glad to say that I have rearranged to be free to assume the responsibilities of which you spoke. This decision is going to be kept under wraps. It will not be publicly announced until February 19th, 1921. So we have a couple months before the rest of the country knows. Warren's keeping it close to his chest. And why is he doing that? You're going to see Warren, it's interesting. He knows who he wants in the cabinet. He knows the people, but he needs to find the right places for them. He also understands that if you're releasing information, one here, 3 weeks later, one here, it doesn't look like a consensus. It doesn't look like a solid, cohesive idea. And look at how the cabinet selection of this last go around was. You're hearing this person's here 3 weeks later. I'm hearing it's now this person. It's going to be this. It's going to be this. You see the turmoil in the news. Warren is trying to present to the country a solid administration that's coming in with an agenda, ready to work, and is cohesive, ready to work together. It's not a piecemeal. It comes together looking like a package, not individual voices. This brings us to the Secretary of Agriculture. This position focuses on commercial farming and trade, livestock production and trade, and food safety. At this point, we're in an age where regulations in food production is still kind of new. It's been watched, but we're still progressing in that era. We didn't really start getting a kick into regulating these sorts of things until the Roosevelt administration. And we're also at a point in our time where our country is still trying to get back from World War I production. We're readjusting our livestock, we're readjusting our agricultural levels to prepare for what we're going to use for the country and what we're going to trade. So there's concerns about how we're going to approach the agricultural issues. The old guard and conservative side of the party preferred men like the two gentlemen on the left. On the left, we have Arthur Capper. He's the former governor of Kansas. He was at that point elected a senator of Kansas. Former Board of Regents member of Kansas State Agricultural College. That's today's Kansas State. He was a newspaper man who put out Capper's Weekly, a popular publication that influenced political views of the average rural Kansas family. Never a farmer, never did it. He wrote about it, he talked about it, he understood what it's like to be in Kansas, but he never actually did the work. In the middle, we have Marion Butler. He was a former senator from North Carolina. He was a farmer, briefly, not by choice. He actually was going to college to be a lawyer, and his father passed away, so he reluctantly came home to run the family farm, and then bolted as soon as he possibly could, and handled it more as a lobbyist position as a president of the National Farmers Association. And he was also a big fan of kind of fusion, of combining the populists and progressives and the Republicans together. So on the one side, he seems like a good compromise guy, but again, he's a lobbyist. He's not a true farmer. He didn't want to do it. He had no interest in doing it. So that's kind of the mindset before. The old administration say a guy that can be in there and fight for what you want him to do, but doesn't understand it. Warren's preferred choice is the gentleman on the right. That's Henry Wallace of Iowa. His son will actually be the vice president, this is Henry C. Wallace, the other one's Henry A. Wallace. Henry A. Wallace will be the vice president to FDR in his third administration. And before that, he'll also be Secretary of Agriculture. So it's a nice little family affair. But Henry Wallace is a professional farmer. He was also an associate professor at Iowa State University teaching agriculture. He was a journalist editor, so again, someone that's used to publications and information and digging into things, perfect for Warren. His publication centered around agricultural news and the way to help trim costs and boost production for an everyday farmer. This was a person that was worried about the farmer because he was a farmer. Exactly the kind of guy that could make a relatable cabinet position, making decisions that would help the average person. He also helped write the farming plank of the 1920 Republican Party platform. And then, which I think is also fun, Arthur Capp, the gentleman I talked to you about on the left with the hat, he publicly came out and suggested that Henry Wallace is better, and said that Henry Wallace has the greatest grasp of the farm situation in the country. Even people that are being suggested for the role are saying, this guy's better. And Warren knows it. He is hearing it from all these different people that are supposed to be coming in there and fighting for the position themselves. He's getting that information from them. Warren knew he wanted to work with Henry Wallace from the very beginning. In a letter to Wallace on November 1st, 1920, the day before the election, he writes to Wallace, "If the verdict on Tuesday is what we are expecting it to be, I shall very much want your assistance in making a good to the promises which we have made to the American people." People on the other side that were used to the old guard were a little nervous, though. Wallace and his periodicals were putting out, I don't want to say they're not scathing, but critical articles about the livestock production, how it's being handled, how it's being regulated. So the livestock business wasn't too pumped about that. So the president of the Chicago Livestock Exchange, Everett Brown, with a delegation came charging up to Marion, hearing that Wallace might be on the block, wanting to sway Warren that this is not the guy you want, obviously. This is a terrible idea because you're going to hold back what we can do. Harding sticks to his guns. And he sits there and says, this is the guy I want. I'm ready to defend it. But he can defend it. He can check all the boxes and be able to say, this is why I understand why you're concerned. This is why he's the right guy. He can defend it. People that don't agree with it can respect the decision. Then we have a more challenging position to attend to, and that's the Secretary of Commerce. This position manages business and governmental decisions on industrial standards and economic development at home and abroad. In other words, handles everything business to make sure it works right. Warren knew he wanted Herbert Hoover in his cabinet. Hoover, today, everyone knows about him as a president, views him as a failure because of the Great Depression, blah, 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 blah. Hoover comes in at this point with a hell of a reputation and a great resume. He's a former miner and engineer. He garnered fame during World War I, helping engineer and steer relief programs for food distributed to Americans in Belgium and throughout Europe during the war. He personally negotiated with German authorities and other international leaders, both on the Allies and the enemy side, to be able to distribute 2 million tons of food to 9 million war victims. He was said to be the only non-political figure to negotiate with all the powers of the world. This is someone that could enter a room and get something done. During the war, Woodrow Wilson appoints Hoover the president of the United States Food Administration, tasked with making sure that food production for the nation and abroad for the war could be done properly. What's fun about it is Hoover, I feel bad for him because his name gets tossed on everything. During the Depression, you hear about Hoover bills, Hoover flags, and all that, and it's even the same back then. He is Hooverizing food production, is what they call it. He's the man that came up with ideas such as meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays to allow that there could be a little bit more of a stretching of what we have for the war and as well at home. He fought and regulated pricing of food and production. This is someone that really took the bull by the horns to regulate a very substantial issue in the country. He was able to send about 23 million tons of food to the Allied powers in Europe, and he garnered a reputation of being an expert administrator and an efficiency guru. Following the war, he followed into the U.S. Food Administration, became the American Relief Association, trying to rebuild Europe and help them following the war. Hoover really took it a different direction. He never looked at international countries politically, he just looked at them as people. He was criticized heavily for providing aid to Germany and the Bolsheviks in Russia, people that were viewed as enemies to us. He still provided them food. Asked if he didn't see that by doing this, you're helping the enemy. Herbert Hoover said, 20 million people are starving, whatever their politics, they will be fed. This is a man that could move past the political issues. Someone that really could be a sounding board, a man that can get something done for Warren. That's what he needs. He needs a doer, not someone that's afraid of making sure he's going down the party lines. The thing is, Hoover, no one knows how to deal with Hoover. He's not a Democrat. He's not a Republican. He's very neutral. He never really declares what he is until during the campaign he says he's a Republican. So that made a lot of people nervous. These are some wonderful quotes that are sent out at him. Hoover gives most of us goose flesh. Hoover wouldn't get along with other cabinet officials, and in a standard cabinet like Woodrow Wilson have, no, Herbert Hoover would never get along with a stuffy room like that. He's too liberal and too internationally minded and too ambitious. This is a man that scares an old guard cabinet and old guard political officials because he doesn't get with the program of standards. This is a person that's ready to do more. Harry New in DC, as I said, was kind of acting as a go-between, starts asking around, hey, what do you guys think about Hoover? And he has to relay to Warren, a lot of people around here don't want Hoover in here. And we don't want Hoover involved at all. So Warren kind of has to push past that. He sees his value. In a letter to Hoover on January 12, 1921, Warren says to Hoover, I hold you in such esteem that your opinion on any matter is of real importance to me. He's sending letters to Hoover asking him his thoughts on some of the cabinet positions he's considering. In particular, he had asked about Wallace. What do you think about him? Harding recognized Hoover as a man that he could work with, a man that could work with anybody, and a man could get stuff done. In a letter to Harry Doherty, he had said, the more I consider him, the more I come to think of him. Of course, I have no quarrel with those who do not think as I do, but inasmuch as I have the responsibility to assume, I think my judgments must be trusted in the matter. Harding, as I said, with certain people, knows he wants them in the cabinet, but he needs to figure out where to put them. He's considering Hoover for commerce. He's considering Hoover for the interior. He starts asking around and finds that Hoover, if he is going to take a position, says commerce is probably more down his alley. And he offers him the position on February 12th, 1921. Hoover's very reluctant to take the position. Warren kind of gives him the old Harding charm and push, and helps with the helps of Charles Evans Hughes and Will Hayes, kind of smooths over the path to get him to come and join. On February 22nd, Warren asks one more time, come on, you gonna join my cabinet? What are we doing? And Hoover responds on a wire on February 23rd, I have no right to refuse your wish, and I will accept the Secretaryship of Commerce. So he knows he found the right guy, but he's not ready to announce this yet because he already sees there's a lot of pushback. And now he has to kind of play some political games to see what do I need to do to get my guy supported and respected for this position. So this is going to take us to the Secretary of Treasury. This is the compromise. The Treasury Department is the actual Treasury. They monitor our precious metals and all that stuff that actually stabilizes our monetary system, as well as the Finance Department of the United States, and advises on fiscal policy in the government. Warren, in making this position, we had said that he is very mindful of not wanting to show Eastern banking dominance. He really wants to find someone Midwest. Chicago bankers are kind of considered that second tier banking, but much more accessible, much more common banking as opposed to the East Coast. So Warren is looking more towards a Midwest or a Western banking field. He has some early candidates floating around. First, we have John Weeks. He's on the left. He's a former congressman and senator from Massachusetts. He's a professional banker and financier. We're going to talk about Weeks a little bit more later on, but just kind of keep in mind, you're going to see an awful lot of them. Next, on the far right, we have Charles Hiles of New York. He's a former chair of the Republican National Committee. He used to be the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and he was also the presidential secretary of William Howard Taft. So again, ties with the old administration, a little bit of dabbling in the Treasury Department. He seems like someone the old guard would feel comfortable with. And then you have Warren's favorite, the gentleman in the middle, Charles Dawes of Illinois. A successful businessman in gas production, former comptroller of currency within the United States, so he's regulating and supervising banks around the United States. He actually helped change regulations in the banking system to try to prevent another panic like the one we had in 1893. He's a Spanish-American War veteran, known for being frank and efficient, maybe sometimes a little too frank. During a Senate hearing following the Spanish-American War, where Dawes had to offer testimony over spending and procurement for the Army, he got frustrated and yelled out, "Helen Maria, we weren't trying to keep a set of books over there, we were trying to win a war." Dawes is a tough guy. He's a tough character, and he's backed by the Midwestern Chicago bankers. He's considered very confident in his positions, very straightforward. This is a guy Warren wants. He's a tough guy. He knows what he's going to do. He's going to stand by his guns. And if Warren pushes on him, he's going to push back until he can get the right decision together. Great guy. Mid-December, Charles Dawes comes and visits the Marion. Warren offers him the position and says, "Hey, what would you be interested in this?" Dawes' response, "Probably not." But he never says no. So Warren's kind of left somewhere in the middle. What's interesting, though, is he gets advice from Philander Knox, the guy that was in the running for the Secretary of State, while he was talking to him, of considering kind of a person that's a little bit more outside the box for this position. And that's Andrew Mellon of Pittsburgh. That's a picture of him looking shocked that he's even in consideration, in case you're wondering why he's got his mouth open. I was trying to figure out, it's just a bad photo. And this is probably because, I'll admit, I work on these projects late at night. My girls are selling Girl Scout cookies, so I've been eating Samoas and all this stuff while I'm working on this stuff. He looks like he's holding an Oreo cookie in his hand, but it's just where his shoulder's landing. But it looked like he was just shocked eating his cookie. And that's why I had to include this photo in here. Andrew Mellon is a wealthy Pennsylvania banker and investor in all fields of industry. He's got anti-League of Nations views. He's a major campaign donor to the Republican Party. Very skilled businessman who rebounded during the Panic of 1893. He is kind of an interesting person to pick. He is someone that's very successful financially, understands the ins and outs of the finance system, how to be successful, how to manage the money, but he's also a guy that is so divested in all industry that someone might sit there saying that there could be a potential of foul play or conflicts of interest. I kind of look at some of these things with today's Elon Musk that you might be considering. Mindsets is this someone that you want to put in there, someone that could be viewed extremely controversially in a role like this? Harding meets with Mellon and Marion, throws the idea out there that would you be interested in this? And Mellon doesn't say no, but Mellon also throws out to him, you know how much money I've got, right? That this is going to look really bad if you put me in a position, almost confused that this is inappropriate. Why would you even think of me in a position like this? Harding kind of sits there for a second, thinks about it, and goes and talks to Dawes one more time and just says, hey, are you really not interested in this position? And Dawes says, no, I don't want it. And says, Mellon might be your best chance for unifying the old guard and getting your job done. And says, I'll back him if you want me to. I'm on board. I'm with you, Warren. Harding says, this might be the right choice after all, but we need to be very careful on how we release this information. So he sends Harry Daugherty to Washington, D.C. to say, go talk to the senators out there and let them know that maybe I'll consider someone like Mellon if you guys back off on Herbert Hoover. You guys don't like Hoover, but you'll like this guy. So, let's kind of talk about this. People start liking this idea that Mellon might kind of toe the line of a more conservative nature of finances. And maybe they can live with Hoover being in there, even if he's not a person they feel super comfortable with. So Hoover's selection is announced to the public on February 24th, and Mellon's position as Secretary of Treasury is announced to the public a couple days later. So one domino knocks over the next. Mellon sounds out of place. Mellon sounds like a corrupt decision or bargain when you see it on the outward face. But then when you really look into it, he fits the role of what Warren wanted. He's a compromise. He's not a Midwestern. He's not an East Coast. He's Pennsylvania, smack dab in the middle. He is a sound financier who is very, very, very self-aware. He knows what taking a position like this might mean, and that really it could be detrimental to him financially just as much as the connotations of what it could do for the administration. Warren, speaking about the matter to Charles Dawes, says, Mellon probably has too much money for a secretary. I may get as much criticism over his appointment as I would if I put JP Morgan in that place. So he realizes it. But on the other side, this is not completely unheard of. During the Wilson administration in 1912, he puts William Gibbs McAdoo, who's a railway president and a financier in railways and urban tunnel systems. He is very financially connected, and people were okay with McAdoo being in there. Not to mention, within a year or two in there, he becomes Wilson's son-in-law, and no one seems to be bothered by that. Mellon looks like a safe decision. Warren had people in mind for his cabinet positions, and he worked hard to find all the right places for them. And that includes Dawes Still, who he convinces Dawes to take a different role as the director of the budget of the Bureau to still use his skills. He knows who he wants involved, and he still pulls them in, even if they reject some of his other thoughts. Mellon's awareness is what made him appropriate for this position, a wealthy man that knows how damning it could be for him and an administration. That's what I think makes him right for this, so publicly aware that I need to do the right job where people are going to be watching me. And if I'm going to do it, I want to do it right. He comes out and says, I really didn't want to come to Washington, but I did not absolutely refuse. He kind of got swept in again with that Harding charm and knowing that maybe this is the right thing to do after all. Brings us to the Secretary of War. This is meant to manage the military affairs of the U.S. Army. It's no longer a cabinet position. Thanks to the National Security Act of 1947, it's been replaced with the Secretary of Defense. It's a sub-department now, but back then it's a cabinet position. There is a strong swelling of support for General Leonard Wood. That's him right there. Political rival of Warren during the 1920 presidential nomination. He's viewed as the continuation of the Teddy Roosevelt progressive style politics within the party. There's pros and cons to bringing him in. Pro, this could be a chance to unify some of the Republican split following the election of people that weren't thrilled with Warren, but were really pro Teddy Roosevelt progressive Leonard Woods. 242 of 300 Republican editors endorsed Leonard Woods. So this is a guy that could really garner support. Problem, there's fears that there'd be some friction. If this is the man who has the final say for promotions in the military, are people going to respect his decision? People that were technically over him in the military, he now would have the say on their political careers. So how would that feel? People view him as too politically ambitious. There's still a deep wound from the campaign in 1920 during the primaries of just kind of how the campaign followed and how Leonard Wood handled himself and policies. There's a fear that he'd be in there more in a position to try to better himself in the future. There is a concern. Warren kind of sidesteps it. He says that he thinks Wood's great. Wood would be a fantastic person, but not in this role. We need to find him a position that really would suit his skill sets best, and kind of skirts it around saying, I want to find a spot for him, but let's think of something else a little bit better. Later, he would serve as the Governor General of the Philippines instead, where you can see why Leonard Wood probably wouldn't work in a cabinet position, because his own cabinet in the Philippines all resigned on him, every single member on the same day, because of how he was handling himself in these positions. So he may have made a good choice on that one. Instead, we are back with John Weeks again. Weeks is the perfect example of what I'm kind of preaching, that Warren knows who he wants in positions. He just doesn't know where to put them. Weeks is a man of many talents and experiences, and he was a significant advisor through the 1920 campaign. Warren knows he could go to him for any source of information and could get there and get what he needs and how to progress. You can see these are all the posts that he was under consideration for. He was in the running for the Treasury Department. He was a major New England banker. He was in the running for Postmaster General. He was the chair of House Committee of the Post Office and Railroads. Navy Department, because he was a Naval Academy grad and a veteran of the Spanish-American War. He was up for the War Department as well, being a senator on the Committee of Military Affairs and a veteran. This guy can fit any mold. He just needed to find the right position for it. Feelers were sent out through Harry New to see kind of how Weeks felt, and Weeks said, I'd be up for the Secretary of War. Felt there was an interest there. On January 15th, 1921, Weeks comes to Marion to speak with Warren and is offered the position. Still, there's no official announcement until mid-February, trying to get time to get all the announcements together. This selection is extremely well received in Washington. Senator James Wadsworth in New York told Warren, following the announcement, I would like $1 for every Army officer and every member of Congress who during the last 2 months has expressed their hope that Weeks would be put his hand to this great task. This was a winner. Next, we have to deal with the Secretary of Labor. This position is a department that administers federal laws regarding labor standards, services, and economic stats and safety. In other words, trying to reel in the wild monster of labor. This cabinet position was still in its infancy. There had only been one person that had the role before Warren got to office. It was created in 1913. The only person to have that position was Pennsylvania Congressman William Wilson. Labor and the industrial landscape was changing. We needed something to help monitor employment, offer federal strategy, and find a way to mediate labor disputes, because labor was the fight between their workers and your business owners, each one wanting to get a little bit more out of the other side. And then you have this fear of strikes that would shut down the economy, shut down the needs of the people. And then you also have the Bolsheviks in Russia with the first Red Scare going on at this time. People are afraid that these strikes could lead to major labor disputes. These major labor disputes can lead to political disputes. Political disputes could lead to an overthrow, just like what happened in Russia. People are very nervous of what does this mean. Then you also have people like Samuel Gompers there on the left, who is the president of the American Federation of Labor, who yielded power and earned fear from business and political officials, because that's a man that could lead this group to make decisions that can affect the economy and everything that's going on in the everyday life. So this position really needed somebody that could straddle what was good for the country and good for the worker. And that's why Warren was extremely concerned of finding the right person. This time we have an array of people that have various reasons that they could be picked. On the left, you have James Duncan. He's the vice president of the American Federation of Labor, head of the Granite Cutters Union, and that's why Samuel Gompers loved him. That was his second in command. Because Gompers was kind of scary to everybody, James Duncan is scary to everybody, saying this is a direct line to the guy that could really overthrow everything with labor, and he's right here, so people are nervous about him. The next guy is William Hutchinson, president of the Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners. The laborers love this guy, but the Republican leadership really doesn't care for him, and it's just not worth anyone's effort to push him through. Next is Thomas O'Connor. He's the president of the International Longshoremen's Association. Factions of organized labor love him. They think this could be a good compromise person. The problem is labor doesn't like him enough because he doesn't like strikes, and he's against tariffs that might help the labor. So labor doesn't like him enough. That leads us to the winner of the whole group at the very end, James Davis, with the best nickname ever, Puddler Jim, which I think is fantastic. If there's ever a nickname I want, that is it. For those of you that are not aware of what a puddler is, it's a person that works with raw iron, and that while they're melting and smelting it, it has to be a hand-on job that can't be automated, because it's a feel. You're watching and you're trying to see how the molten iron starts forming little droplets or balls to know when to pull it. That's a puddler. Very dangerous job. He didn't do it long, but then again, most people that did that profession didn't last long in them for various maiming or death purposes. So he did all right. Puddler Jim is an active union member, so someone that can relate to the laborers. He was a laborer. He was the Director General of the Loyal Order of the Moose. He was known as the Napoleon of fraternity. He had amazing networking skills. Supposedly, he could remember thousands of individuals by their first name. So he's a networker. He's a person that could work with anybody and get things done. He's supported by the Streetcarmen's Union and the Iron Molders Union, anti-Gompers, and he was an active Republican and a strong supporter of Warren. January 7th, he's invited to meet with Warren and Marion, and he is offered the post, and he accepts. And I think that we can see that he could really be a nice neutral person that understands the needs and what makes sense. News of this selection got labor leaders really upset. People felt that he wasn't labor enough because he's too neutral. He's not pro-labor enough. This leads to Samuel Gompers sending a telegram to Warren explaining why Davis is a terrible selection, because no man is fully capable to fill the position of Secretary of Labor who lacks the sympathy, respect, and confidence of the wage workers of our country. Warren is left to have to defend this choice. It's tough. It fits the goals, but isn't the strongest backer for labor. But Warren knows this is the right one. This is someone I can work with, and it's someone that Warren's going to have to sit with and fight to gain the support. Next leads us to the Postmaster General position. This is a position that's managing and running the postal system and all the mail routes. It's a minor cabinet position that since 1971 has been reorganized out of the cabinet into its own independent agency, the United States Postal Service. The Postmaster General acts more like a CEO today and is appointed by the agency's own Board of Governors. There's John Weeks again, because he's everywhere. Will Hayes, who had been vital in keeping the Great Listening Post humming, was offered this position on January 17th. Well, January 17th, Warren told him, hey, you can either have this position or I'm considering making a commission to reorganize the government. I'll let you take the chairmanship of that if you'd like. Hayes thinks for about 3 weeks and says, yeah, I'll take the Postmaster General position. He had really hoped to be selected as the Secretary of Commerce for some reason or another. Hayes' cabinet selection was more based on his ability to work with Warren and others and to be trusted, a trusted sounding board at the cabinet level. I was really thinking about this late the other night when I was putting these notes together going, why the heck did you think he could be the Commerce Secretary? I was really trying to figure this out. There's got to be a reason. And I was digging back. Other than being a professional lobbyist in the Republican Party, he was a Presbyterian deacon before that. He had no business being anything involved with the commerce and at all. But his conservative reputation and a little bit of the deaconship came into play later on down the road that he's going to resign from the position of Postmaster General to become the first chairman of the Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors of America. His job is to codify the moral guidelines of motion pictures. Yeah. So he's going to be the one to make sure that everything is squeaky clean when you go to the theaters. The part that I love is that photo on the right, which might be a little hard to tell. He's the gentleman in the middle that looks like he has tags on him. That photo was taken on his very last day when he resigned from his position as Postmaster General. The men around him are the postal delivery men ready to ship him to Los Angeles for his new position. And the men next to him are putting the correct postage amounts on him to make sure that he will safely make it to Los Angeles. Secretary of the Navy, there's Weeks again. This position is meant to manage the military affairs of the Navy, just like the war chairman, war secretaryship. This is also going to become a minor position replaced by the Secretary of Defense. Initially, Warren offered the position to Frank Loudon. He's the gentleman on the right. He is the former governor of Illinois. He's also going to run against Warren for the Republican position for the presidential nomination in 1920. It's interesting kind of where Loudon fits. Loudon is really shocked that he's even receiving the offer. He's presented on January 17th with this when Warren invites him to marry him. It was actually the same day that he offered Will Hayes his position. And you can tell that as positions are settled, he's knocking down the next domino. I need to fill this, I need to fill this. Loudon, the thought would be that Loudon could kind of help unify the party maybe a little bit, and Loudon's much more reasonable to work with as opposed to Leonard Wood. So someone that we can come together, unite kind of a split in the party of people wanting other people, very reasonable. Loudon also switched gears and helped push for Warren while the campaign was going on. This could be a guy that I can work with. This could work well. Loudon had really hoped to be offered the agricultural or the treasury positions, and he realized he had absolutely no background in naval affairs or military affairs at all, and he wasn't suited for this position and says, no, I think I'm going to say no. Warren's going to offer the position 2 more times to him, saying each time, I swear this is not an honorary thing. This is not to pump your ego. I want to work with you, and people want to work with you. Warren says in his last telegram to Frank Loudon on February 14th, I think a great public approval awaits your acceptance. If you insist once more on the impossibility, I will accept its finality. Loudon declines once more, or how I look at it, happy Valentine's Day, Warren. I'm not doing it. But again, Warren's talking to everybody. John Weeks, when he's discussing, would this be a good position for you or not? And even Frank Loudon about whether he'd like this position or not, they both suggest a different person together. That's Edwin Denby. Obviously, you're all brimming with excitement when you hear the name Edwin Denby. Just like the newspapers, the New York Times, upon the selection of Denby, put out in headlines, Denby, who's Denby? Really, he's the perfect selection for this position, and people don't know who he is. He's a former gunner's mate. That's a guy who maintains all firearms on a ship, from handguns all the way up to the mounted cannons. And he's doing this during the Spanish-American War. He's going to re-enlist during World War I as a private in the Marines in his early 40s. he's discharged as a major. He's a 6-year congressman that sat on the Committee of Naval Affairs. He's great. He fits the bill to a T. He's also going to have a private life job as a successful automobile manufacturer. He worked really hard during the campaign with Warren, could work with him. Warren says, it kind of makes sense. Offers Denby the position on February 22nd. Denby says, on reflection, the invitation took me off my feet. I was overwhelmed. Denby was a no-nonsense and focused man, perfect for the cabinet. He showed examples of how firm he could be in decisions and fighting for things. He is, I wanted to share this just to kind of explain the man that he is. Someone that could stand up for a principle or something that really meant a lot in any sort of issue that would arise. While he was as the Secretary of the Navy, there had been strings of mail robberies on trains going out throughout the country, and the Marines, through Denby's leadership, had placed 2 Marines on train cars to protect the mail. Denby had said, and I quote, "If 2 Marines are covered by a robber, neither must put up his hands, but both must immediately go for their guns. One may die, but the other will get the robber and the mail will get through. When our corps goes out as guards over the mail, that mail must be delivered, or there must be a Marine dead at the post of duty. There can be no compromise." Yeah, this is a guy that's going to stand behind it. And that's why I like the picture of him on the left. He just seems so happy. But this is these are a weird, when you really think about it, this is a weird group of people that are firm in what they believe and can push back again against Warren if need be. But showing that we're still keeping a little political prowess amongst ourselves. On the right, that's a photo of Denby with his Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a 34-year-old Theodore Roosevelt Jr. So we're still keeping a couple things in tow to make sure everyone's happy amongst the party. Now we have to talk about 2 more positions that are a little bit more controversial. First, we have to talk about the Secretary of the Interior. This position is responsible for the management of federal lands and natural resources. Warren always had one person in mind for this position as well, and that's Albert Fall, U.S. Senator from New Mexico. He is a self-made man of the West, former judge and the first senator from New Mexico. Gun-toting, politically inclined and experienced, ruthless fighter, and skilled debater. Robert Murray, in his Harding biography, wrote, he put it absolutely perfectly, Harding simply liked him. Fall is a very likable cowboy guy. He is a man that when I say gun-toting, he literally had a revolver in his Senate desk or in between the cushions of his car that he drove around in. This was a man that was ready to fight. Anything going on, ready to fight. Traditionally, the interior post has been offered to a Westerner. That's because out west is most of our natural resources, federal lands, it's all out there. There's some on the east, but it's most Midwest and West. Even today, our current Interior Secretary, Doug Burgum, is from North Dakota. Fall was considered an expert in Western matters, especially anything that involved Mexico, Central, and South America. So at that point, great sounding board for Warren again. He wrote the plank in the 1920 Republican platform pertaining to issues with our southern neighbors. He sat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee with Harding. He's anti-Wilson, anti-League of Nations. He is the top of irreconcilables. You go through stories of Fall, and everyone says everyone admired him and respected him throughout Washington, D.C. Friends and foes alike. People respected him, and that included Warren. On February 4th, Warren offers Albert Fall the position. The story goes that this was a corrupt deal during the smoke-filled room period when Warren was, all the people are making their decisions that we will choose Warren to get this role because we can control what's going on. The story is in that same meeting, the oil magnates decide you'll put Albert Fall in there if we go this way, which is complete BS. And you can see where this whole kind of shakes out. These stories are floating there in the ether, and it just goes and goes and goes. He was the last announced cabinet position on March 1st. Fall was regarded as a logical and solid selection from everyone in Washington, D.C. In fact, when Warren presented to Congress, to the Senate, that these are the men that I am presenting to you for my cabinet, typically you have debates, you have discussions of what's going on. The Senate proclaimed by voice vote that we don't need to go through the typical rigmarole to see if this is right, and went through a unanimous voice vote to approve him for this position. People thought this was phenomenal to put Albert Fall there. But Fall will forever be a figure of corruption when describing the Harding administration. The cabinet will always be tainted by Albert Fall and the Teapot Dome scandal, what was considered to be the largest scandal of its nature until Watergate in the 1970s. In a nutshell, to try to make a very complicated thing very simple, the United States government was leasing oil reserved lands to the public or private sector. Albert Fall controlled those leases, negotiated them with oil magnates that he knew, and the question became, was it vetted properly? Why did he select who he selected? And by the way, these people that he knew also loaned him money. On the surface, it looks bad, because it kind of is, but it's hard to say. Albert Fall defended himself saying that I personally worked with these people out west. He was also a part of this industry. I negotiated better deals doing it my way, and it wasn't illegal to do it. And people have studied it, and you can see, yeah, he probably made a more aggressive deal that actually helped the United States. But was it a tainted decision? It is a very tough thing to kind of describe. In the end, if not anything, they were extremely unethical decisions that were made. And Fall will be pulled down with it as the first cabinet position secretary, any person in a cabinet position, to be found guilty and served time for crimes he committed while in office. This whole ordeal is very complicated. It's going to both leave implications on Secretary of Navy Edwin Denby, because before Fall took the position, the naval reserves were in the Navy Department. Fall wanted the reserves so he can control all the natural resources. It's a whole thing. If you want to learn about our YouTube channel, it has a wonderful thing about me talking about Albert Fall. You should go watch that. It's good light evening listening to. My soothing voice will put you to sleep at the end of the night with dreams of Albert Fall dancing in your head. But Harding will also be pulled into this. This is where you get the drag downs because of people like Albert Fall. Albert Shaw, in the Review of Reviews after the Harding presidency, explained, the senator from New Mexico was recommended for a cabinet place by almost every public man in Washington. His appointment was made by Mr. Harding in entire good faith. Fall was a man Harding felt he could trust. He was a well-regarded man who could work with the Senate. He respected his views on the matter of the interior. He had similar stances to Harding's own political views. Someone who would not hesitate to argue or debate an issue. He was a solid person for the position, and a person Warren would want in the cabinet. The other stuff afterwards is something that you don't necessarily plan for when you're picking people for positions. And that leads us to our last gentleman to discuss for a moment, and that is our Attorney General, Harry Daugherty. The Attorney General is the head of the Department of Justice and the chief law enforcement officer of the federal government. It's a very influential and important position, and was offered to Harry Daugherty of Ohio, Harding's campaign manager and a loyal friend, and a very controversial selection. Again, I'm the only person that likes this poor guy in the state of Ohio. He is very vain. He styles himself as a new age political boss in the makings of our turn of the century party bosses, Mark Hanna and Joe Foraker. He made a lot of political enemies throughout his time in Ohio, as well on the national stage. His past actions to kind of further his career, or people around him, ruffled a lot of feathers in Ohio and around everyone else. People did not trust him. People did not feel comfortable with him. The Daugherty, is fun on it, because in retrospect, Daugherty says, oh, I didn't want the position. No, I knew I wanted to go back to private life. And in the Harding tragedy, he writes that Warren came to him and says, are you going to stand by me or desert me after all these years? I've never needed you in my life as I do today. which sounds so pleading that, of course, how could he ever say no? It was a not so well-kept secret that Doherty wanted this position. The story that Mark Sullivan, a journalist, got was Doherty was telling all of his Ohio friends he wanted the position so he can march down Broad Street in Columbus and tell his arch nemesis newspaper man Bob Wolf that he can go to hell. So Doherty it's funny that he's also a whiner, and all of his stories are skewed, like I've discussed, that people were saying that what would have really happened? Did Warren really want him? Did Warren really need him? Finley Peter Dune, who is a journalist at that time as well, had described the situation, I thought, very poignantly. He says, I believe that if Harding had refused him the appointment, he would have gone into the corner and cried, but then he would have wiped away the tears and come back and served as faithfully as ever. That is Doherty to a T. Doherty is, he really can do a great job when you need him to, but you have to accept what's going to come with it. You're going to have to deal with the vanity. You're going to have to deal with the over-embellished ego. You're going to have to be prepared for him to do a few things that, in Warren's case, he's going to shake his head and go, oh, come on, Harry, why'd you say that? And but at the end, Doherty fit what Warren needed in his cabinet. Again, was he the best choice in the entire world? Probably not. But he was someone that was loyal. Warren could trust his judgment. At the end of the day, Doherty wanted to protect Warren, and even if it might be to his own benefit, would fight for Warren. He was a shrewd lawyer. He was a skilled lobbyist. He knew how to get things done politically in Washington. He knew the wheelings and dealings, and he was someone who worked hard to promote Warren and his agenda and would continue to work hard for his friend. Not the best decision, not the worst, but when you look at it as a whole picture of what is a cabinet that he wants, he fits the mold. It is a very, very well-rounded cabinet. You can kind of see our statistics here. You just kind of throughout the nation. You have 2 from Pennsylvania, 1 from California, 1 New York, 1 Massachusetts, 1 Ohio, 1 Michigan, 1 Iowa, 1 Indiana, 1 New Mexico. On the other side, you see all the different professions that are going through there. Mark Sullivan wrote in May 1921, this was one of the strongest groups of presidential advisors and department heads in a generation. William Monroe wrote in the Atlantic Monthly in March 1923, this is 2 years after the cabinet selections. No presidential cabinet during the past half century has been better balanced or has included within its membership a wider range of political experience. This is a group that is very different from what we're used to seeing. It's a diverse group that will fight for what they know is the best decisions, will offer Warren all sides of an issue, and can get stuff done. And I love this picture because John Weeks down there in the bottom left in a chair looks like a beast. He is like 3 times the size of everyone sitting there. That's what you want as a Secretary of War. You get him out there with a helmet, you know what will mess with you. But the reason I'm trying to show some of these comparisons, because even when you see their professions, which I have listed on the right, you have bankers, a couple professional politicians, but an automobile manufacturer, a lodge director, a humanitarian engineer, a rancher, a journal editor, a lawyer. These are people that have outside professions. They are not of the political yes man in the political field, which is where we get this comparison of Harding versus Wilson cabinets. They are very different. Wilson had a group of what I put in quotes as advisors. These are people who would advise him to continue his own thoughts. He wanted to be the smartest man in the room. He wanted the people in the room to also believe he was the smartest man in the room and promote what he was trying to do. He has a tendency while in office to pressure or replace cabinet officials who do not fully echo in his beliefs. A great example is William Jennings Bryan, his initial Secretary of State, having strong apprehensions of us joining the war effort in World War I, was pressured to resign by Wilson because he did not go with the program. Robert Murray describes the Harding campaign, which I love the term of uniquely Harding. The campaign and the cabinet selections are uniquely Harding. It is a distorted image that has been created of a weak and vacillating Harding being led about by various advisors who put words in his mouth. Warren had a vision of what he wanted and he had a plan to get there. He knew the types of people he wanted to be surrounded with. He just needed to find the right place for them. These are people that could promote his newspaper-minded sense of digging down and finding all the information to be able to present a full, concise story. These are people that could come together to be able to lead us through an initial economic panic, could lead us to rebuilding following World War I, help us be a leader of world peace and disarmament, someone that could get us through strikes when we have various issues in Chicago at the time, someone that can help us get back on an agricultural footing to make us a world trading partner. These are people that, instead of coming in there with self-centered goals, whether it be Warren or his cabinet officials, could come at a table and find solutions to a problem. And that's because Warren found people that would come to a table ready to solve a problem. Just for giggles, I sat down for 10 seconds to think of a what-if scenario. I consider this the team of rivals scenario. Abraham Lincoln is always praised of having his cabinet comprised of everyone that hated each other, and because of their hatred, they were able to come together to find solutions. Well, I sat there and said, well, let's just pick everybody that wouldn't work, and let's see what happens. What happens if you put Elihu Root as Secretary of State on the more progressive side, Marion Butler, the conservative side of agriculture, anybody but Hoover? You put Charles Dawes, who's ready in there yelling Helen Maria at everybody. You have Leonard Wood, who wants to promote himself. James Duncan, who has gompers in his ear saying, only worry about the workers. You can leave Will Hayes in there because, heck, he's not doing anything bad. Frank Loudon, who doesn't understand naval issues and a nation that's trying to figure out how to de-escalate a military force. Albert Fall is still fun to plug in there, and Harry Daugherty. You put all these people that don't know how to work together, although they are firm in their beliefs, will never have the goal of what's best for America, what's best for the country, that Warren brought together at a table. This is a powder keg. This is going to be an explosive cabinet, and is proof of why Warren's plan made sense, to meet with everyone to find the right people, not mindlessly going where people are saying, oh, Warren doesn't know what he's doing, they're just telling him who to put there. If he does that, you have a cabinet like this that is not prepared to take care of a country following a war, into a panic, and trying to get ourselves into that roaring 20s period of success for the United States. In the end, Warren Harding created a cabinet that could get things done, a cabinet that could help make the country better, including John Weeks fixing his pants with his hands in his pockets on the left. Not everyone loved every selection that was made by this cabinet, but everyone could respect it, give or take Harry Daugherty. Regardless of everything, this cabinet was above all else, like their president, uniquely Harding. Be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Yes, sir, Bill.
Which cabinet member worked in the auto industry again?
That would be, that is John Weeks.
Weeks, okay.
Yep.
Do you know which company? I'm curious, I'll Google it.
You know, these are the rabbit holes where I sit there and say, I want to know what these things are, but I tell myself if I go there, I'm going to go like 3/4 of an hour trying to figure out John Weeks. So I don't have that one handy, I'm sorry. At that point, during the auto industry, you do have a lot of smaller automotive makers that are, before it really started becoming your mega magnated corporations like Ford and all them up there.
I do have one other
Yes, sir.
question. You always hear Ohio gang.
Yeah.
And who besides Doherty and Jeff Smith, who was a buddy of his, the conception seems to be like, oh, he just brought all his friends from Ohio and they had no experience. But who are the Ohio gang?
Your true deep down Ohio gang is Harry Daugherty, Jeff Smith, and Howard Mannington. That's your real core Ohio gang. And people always, like, if you want a 10-second laugh, go look up Ohio gang on Wikipedia, and you see the list of people, with 4 of them are from Ohio. Albert Falls is part of the Ohio gang, if you weren't aware, apparently. Mm-hmm. But these are people that are always viewed as the Daugherty, kind of like I discussed, might not be the perfect choice for a position, but as someone that could get along with Warren, as a friend of his, and could be a trusted confidant in issues. Because of that, it's always viewed that anyone that came with it was a poor decision of friendship or blind decisions. Doherty had his own little social circles and agenda, and Warren's pulled into it as the Ohio gang because he's the president. So obviously everything that happens in the administration, he has hands on every single facet and must know everything going on. Because even Denby is considered a part of the Ohio gang. And it's because, as I said before, the oil leasings from Teapot Dome, because there are oil reserves in case of we were running low on oil during a war effort because of our naval ships. So our oil reserves were in naval hands. Albert Fall comes and says, you know what, I'm supposed to be in control of natural resources. I want this. Denby says, well, that makes sense. In fact, you used to be in charge of this until the war happened. So yeah, let's reorganize it back to the Interior Department. Hey, Warren, are you okay with this? Yeah, makes sense. It used to be Interior Department. Go over there. Because of that transaction and oil leasing because of Fall, now it's a corrupt that Denby and Harding had this plan to pass it over to Fall, to pass it to oil magnates. This is how this Ohio gang story starts, that everyone must be in this corrupt plan. And it's not as cloak and dagger as it sounds. Although Doherty and Jess Smith are fun people to talk about.
Wasn't Doherty in Ohio Republican politics for a long time, even before Harding?
He was essentially tried to be the Ohio political boss. Following Mark Hanna's passing, Doherty dreamed of being that. That's why you see him with these campaigns trying to paint himself as the kingmaker to Warren during the 1920s. And he was a very skilled campaigner. He knew how to run a campaign. He knew how to talk to people and get a network going. But he was never wielding that power. And by trying to do it and not doing it as cleanly or as well as Hanna, a worker, he kind of made a lot of people ticked off and a lot of enemies along the way. I enjoy talking about Doherty. It's fun. Yes.
I was wondering a little bit, the era that it was in not real fast immigration.
Mhm.
Was there diversity amongst these people in terms of their backgrounds and,
As in ethnics, you mean?
Yes, ethnic.
Well, actually, to a certain degree, now I will admit they're all white Anglo-Saxon people.
Right.
But Albert Fall actually fits that role, as crazy as that sounds, because obviously when you look at Albert Fall, it screams Hispanic. But Albert Fall, when he was running for the Senate in New Mexico, was the only politician that actually campaigned in Spanish. None of his contemporaries would do it. He did, and that actually what garnered him mass support amongst the people in New Mexico. He understood kind of understanding the ethnics and the diversity of people, and that's again where his strength was, of understanding the Southwest and any issues with it, because he actually could talk to the people, where the other ones that would be running against him in similar positions for the Senate couldn't speak Spanish, couldn't talk to the people, never really understood what was going on. So you do have a little bit of that ethnicity from, of all people, Albert Fall. But still, you're at a primarily white cabinet, white government officials side. But Warren is inviting African Americans and other groups like that, minorities, to the Great Listening Post to be able to talk. What issues are going on with you? What do we need to do to understand your needs as well? And notwithstanding all of his own policy while in office.
I didn't hear any names like that sounded Italian or anything like that much either. It's just.
It's different.
Yeah.
It really is. And when you go down the list of everyone, because I sat there trying really to go apples to oranges, of Wilson to Harding, to see what was going on. I went a couple cabinets back, and you see a very strong Eastern presence and a strong Eastern Southern presence, but you really don't go west of the Mississippi. You have a little bit. And that's where I think you see the diversity in geographic decisions, where Warren is still a man of the people. He's bringing in people that have experiences in different regions that could really make a difference of what they bring to issues at the table. Fantastic, folks.
Okay, John, thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate everybody coming today, and don't forget to go on our website, hardingpresidentialsites.org. This Harding Symposium registration is open, and that is in July, where our theme is Politics at the Doorstep. the presidential front porch campaigns. So we'll have representatives of all of the presidential sites whose president had a front porch campaign. So it's going to be a great event, so sign up now. But thank you very much, John. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.